Section 5 of Against Celsus, Book 7, by Origen of Alexandria, translated by Frederick Crombie. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapters 41 to 50. But let us consider who those persons are whose guidance Celsus would have us to follow, so that we may not be in want of guides who are recommended both by their antiquity and sanctity. He refers us to divinely inspired poets, as he calls them, to wise men and philosophers, without mentioning their names, so that, after promising to point out those who should guide us, he simply hands us over in a general way to divinely inspired poets, wise men, and philosophers. If he had specified their names in particular, we should have felt ourselves bound to show him that he wished to give us as guides men who were blinded to the truth, and who must therefore lead us into error, or that, if not wholly blinded, yet they are in error in many matters of belief. But whether Ophius, Parmenides, Empedocles, or even Homer himself, and Hesiod are the persons whom he meant by inspired poets, let anyone show how those who follow their guidance walk in a better way, or lead a more excellent life than those who, being taught in the school of Jesus Christ, have rejected all images and statues, and even all Jewish superstition, that they may look upward through the word of God to the one God, who is the Father of the Word. Who, then, are those wise men and philosophers from whom Celsus would have us to learn so many divine truths, and for whom we are to give up Moses, the servant of God, the prophets of the Creator of the world, who have spoken so many things by a truly divine inspiration, and even him who has given light and taught the way of piety to the whole human race, so that no one can reproach him if he remains without a share in the knowledge of his mysteries? Such indeed was the abounding love which he had for men, that he gave to the more learned a theology capable of raising the soul far above all earthly things, while with no less consideration he comes down to the weaker capacities of ignorant men, of simple women, of slaves, and, in short, of all those who, from Jesus alone, could have received that help for the better regulation of their lives, which is supplied by his instructions in regard to the divine being, adapted to their wants and capacities. Celsus next refers us to Plato as to a more effective teacher of theological truths, and quotes the following passage from the Timaeus, quote, "It is a hard matter to find out the maker and father of this universe, and after having found him, it is impossible to make him known to all." End quote. To which he himself adds this remark, quote, "You perceive, then, how divine men seek after the way of truth, and how well Plato knew that it was impossible for all men to walk in it, but as wise men have found it for the express purpose of being able to convey to us some notion of him who is the first, the unspeakable being, a notion, namely, which may represent him to us through the medium of other objects, they endeavor either by synthesis, which is the combining of various qualities, or by analysis, which is the separation and setting aside of some qualities, or finally by analogy. In these ways, I say, they endeavor to set before us that which it is impossible to express in words. I should therefore be surprised if you could follow in that course, since you are so completely wedded to the flesh as to be incapable of seeing aught but what is impure." End quote. These words of Plato are noble and admirable, but see if Scripture does not give us an example of a regard for mankind still greater in God the Word, who was, quote, "in the beginning with God," end quote, and, quote, "who was made flesh," end quote, in order that he might reveal to all men truths which, according to Plato, it would be impossible to make known to all men, even after he had found them himself. Plato may say that, quote, "it is a hard thing to find out the creator and father of this universe," end quote, by which language he implies that it is not wholly beyond the power of human nature to attain to such knowledge as is either worthy of God, or if not, is far beyond that which is commonly attained. Although, if it were true that Plato or any other of the Greeks had found God, they would never have given homage and worship or ascribed the name of God to any other than to him. They would have abandoned all others, and would not have associated with this great God objects which can have nothing in common with him. For ourselves, we maintain that human nature is in no way able to seek after God, or to attain a clear knowledge of him without the help of him whom it seeks. He makes himself known to those who, after doing all that their powers will allow, confess that they need help from him, who discovers himself to those whom he approves, insofar as it is possible for man and the soul, still dwelling in the body, to know God. Observe that when Plato says that, quote, after having found out the creator and father of the universe, it is impossible to make him known to all men, end quote, he does not speak of him as unspeakable and as incapable of being expressed in words. On the contrary, he implies that he may be spoken of, and that there are a few to whom he may be made known. But Celsus, as if forgetting the language which he had just quoted from Plato, immediately gives God the name of the unspeakable. He says, quote, since the wise men have found out this way, in order to be able to give us some idea of the first of beings, who is unspeakable. End quote. For ourselves, we hold that not God alone is unspeakable, but other things also which are inferior to him. Such are the things which Paul labors to express when he says, quote, I heard unspeakable words, which it is not lawful for a man to utter, end quote, where the word heard is used in the sense of understood, as in the passage, quote, he who hath ears to hear, let him hear, end quote. We also hold that it is a hard matter to see the creator and father of the universe, but it is possible to see him in the way thus referred to, quote, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, end quote. And not only so, but also in the sense of the words of him, quote, who is the image of the invisible God. He who hath seen me hath seen the Father who sent me, end quote. No sensible person could suppose that these last words were spoken in reference to his bodily presence, which was open to the view of all. Otherwise, all those who said, quote, crucify him, end quote, and Pilate, who had the power over the humanity of Jesus, were among those who saw God the Father, which is absurd. Moreover, that these words, quote, he that hath seen me hath seen the Father who sent me, end quote, are not to be taken in their grosser sense, is plain from the answer which he gave to Philip, quote, have I been so long time with you, and yet dost thou not know me, Philip? End quote. After Philip had asked, quote, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us, end quote, he then, who perceives how these words, quote, the Word made flesh, end quote, are to be understood of the only begotten Son of God, the firstborn of all creation, will also understand how, in seeing the image of the invisible God, we see, quote, the Creator and Father of the universe, end quote. Celsus supposes that we may arrive at a knowledge of God either by combining or separating certain things after the methods which mathematicians call synthesis and analysis, or again by analogy, which is employed by them also, and that in this way we may, as it were, gain admission to the chief good. But when the word of God says, quote, no man knoweth the Father but the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him, end quote, he declares that no one can know God but by the help of divine grace coming from above with a certain divine inspiration. Indeed, it is reasonable to suppose that the knowledge of God is beyond the reach of human nature, and hence the many errors into which men have fallen in their views of God. It is then, through the goodness and love of God to mankind, and by a marvelous exercise of divine grace to those whom he saw in his foreknowledge, and knew that they would walk worthy of him who had made himself known to them, and that they would never swerve from a faithful attachment to his service, although they were condemned to death or held up to ridicule by those who, in ignorance of what true religion is, give that name to what deserves to be called anything rather than religion. God doubtless saw the pride and arrogance of those who, with contempt for all others, boast of their knowledge of God and of their profound acquaintance with divine things obtained from philosophy, but who still, not less even than the most ignorant, run after their images and temples and famous mysteries, and seeing this he, quote, had chosen the foolish things of this world, end quote. The simplest of Christians, who lead, however, a life to greater moderation and purity than many philosophers, quote, to confound the wise, end quote, who are not ashamed to address inanimate things as gods or images of the gods. For what reasonable man can refrain from smiling when he sees that one who has learned from philosophy such profound and noble sentiments about God or the gods turns straightway to images and offers to them his prayers, or imagines that by gazing upon these material things he can ascend from the visible symbol to that which is spiritual and immaterial? But a Christian, even of the common people, is assured that every place forms part of the universe and that the whole universe is God's temple. In whatever part of the world he is, he prays, but he rises above the universe, quote, shutting the eyes of sense and raising upwards the eyes of the soul, end quote. And he stops not at the vault of heaven, but passing in thought beyond the heavens under the guidance of the Spirit of God, and having thus, as it were, gone beyond the visible universe, he offers prayers to God. But he prays for no trivial blessing, for he has learnt from Jesus to seek for nothing small or mean, that is, sensible, objects, but to ask only for what is great and truly divine. And these things God grants to us to lead us to that blessedness which is found only with him through his Son, the Word, who is God. But let us see further what the things are which he proposes to teach us, if indeed we can comprehend them, since he speaks of us as being, quote, utterly wedded to the flesh, end quote. Although, if we live well and in accordance with the teachings of Jesus, we hear this said of us, quote, ye are not of the flesh, but in the Spirit, if the Spirit of God dwelleth in you, end quote. He says also that we look upon nothing that is pure, although our endeavor is to keep even our thoughts free from all defilement of sin, and although in prayer we say, quote, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, end quote, so that we may behold him with that pure heart to which alone is granted the privilege of seeing him. This, then, is what he proposes for our instruction. Quote, things are either intelligible, which we call substance, being, or visible, which we call becoming. With the former is truth. From the latter arises error. Truth is the object of knowledge. Truth and error form opinion. Intelligible objects are known by the reason, visible objects by the eyes. The action of the reason is called intelligent perception, that of the eye's vision. As, then, among visible things, the sun is neither the eye nor vision, but that which enables the eye to see and renders vision possible, and in consequence of it visible things are seen, all sensible things exist, and itself is rendered visible. So among things intelligible, that which is neither reason, nor intelligent perception, nor knowledge, is yet the cause which enables the reason to know, which renders intelligent perception possible, and in consequence of it, knowledge arises. All things intelligible, truth itself and substance have their existence, and itself, which is above all these things, become, in some ineffable way, intelligible. These things are offered to the consideration of the intelligent, and if even you can understand any of them, it is well. And if you think that a divine spirit has descended from God to announce divine things to men, it is doubtless this same spirit that reveals these truths, and it was under the same influence that men of old made known many important truths. But if you cannot comprehend these things, then keep silence. Do not expose your own ignorance, and do not accuse of blindness those who see, or of lameness those who run, while you yourselves are utterly lamed and mutilated in mind, and lead a merely animal life, the life of the body, which is the dead part of our nature. End quote. We are careful not to oppose fair arguments, even if they proceed from those who are not of our faith. We strive not to be captious, or to seek to overthrow any sound reasonings. But here we have to reply to those who slander the character of persons wishing to do their best in the service of God, who accepts the faith which the meanest place in him, as well as the more refined and intelligent piety of the learned, seeing that both alike address to the Creator of the world their prayers and thanksgivings, through the high priest who has set before men the nature of pure religion. We say, then, that those who are stigmatized as, quote, lame and mutilated in spirit, as living only for the sake of the body which is dead, end quote, are persons whose endeavor it is to say with sincerity, quote, For though we live in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not fleshly, but mighty through God." End quote. It is for those who throw out such vile accusations against men who desire to be God's servants, to beware lest, by the calumnies which they cast upon others who strive to live well, they lame their own souls and mutilate the inner man, by severing from it that justice and moderation of mind which the Creator has planted in the nature of all his rational creatures. As for those, however, who, along with other lessons given by the divine word, have learned and practiced this, quote, "when reviled to bless, when persecuted to endure, when defamed to entreat," end quote, they may be said to be walking in spirit in the ways of uprightness, to be purifying and setting in order the whole soul. They distinguish, and to them the distinction is not one of words merely between substance, or that which is and that which is becoming, between things apprehended by reason and things apprehended by sense. And they connect truth with one and avoid the errors arising out of the other, looking as they have been taught not at the things becoming or phenomenal which are seen, and therefore temporary, but at better things than these, whether we call them substance or spiritual things, as being apprehended by reason, or invisible because they lie out of the reach of the senses. The disciples of Jesus regard these phenomenal things only, that they may use them as steps to ascend to the knowledge of the things of reason. For, quote, "the invisible things of God," end quote, that is, the object of the reason, quote, "from the creation of the world are clearly seen," end quote, by the reason, quote, "being understood by the things that are made," end quote. And when they have risen from the created things of this world to the invisible things of God, they do not stay there, but after they have sufficiently exercised their minds upon these things, and have understood their nature, they ascend to, quote, "the eternal power of God," end quote, in a word, to his divinity. For they know that God, in his love to men, has manifested his truth, and, quote, "that which is known of him," end quote, not only to those who devote themselves to his service, but also to some who are far removed from the purity of worship and service which he requires, and that some of those who by the providence of God had attained a knowledge of these truths were yet doing things unworthy of that knowledge and, quote, "holding the truth in unrighteousness," end quote, and who are unable to find any excuse before God after the knowledge of such great truths which he has given them. For Scripture testifies in regard to those who have a knowledge of those things of which Celsus speaks, and who profess a philosophy founded on these principles, that they, quote, "when they knew God, glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations," end quote. And notwithstanding the bright light of knowledge with which God had enlightened them, quote, "their foolish heart," end quote, was carried away and became darkened. Thus we may see how those who accounted themselves wise gave proofs of great folly when, after such grand arguments delivered in the schools on God and on things apprehended by the reason, they, quote, "changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things," end quote. As then they lived in a way unworthy of the knowledge which they had received from God, his providence leaving them to themselves, they were given, quote, "up to uncleanness through the lusts of their hearts to dishonor their own bodies," end quote, in shamelessness and licentiousness, because they, quote, "changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator," end quote. But those who are despised for their ignorance and set down as fools and abject slaves no sooner commit themselves to God's guidance by accepting the teaching of Jesus than, so far from defiling themselves by licentious indulgence or the gratification of shameless passion, they in many cases, like perfect priests for whom such pleasures have no charm, keep themselves in act and in thought in a state of virgin purity. The Athenians have one Hierophant, who, not having confidence in his power to restrain his passions within the limits he prescribed for himself, determined to check them at their seat by the application of hemlock, and thus he was accounted pure and fit for the celebration of religious worship among the Athenians. But among Christians may be found men who have no need of hemlock to fit them for the pure service of God, and for whom the word, in place of hemlock, is able to drive all evil desires from their thoughts, so that they may present their prayers to the divine being. And attached to the other so-called gods are a select number of virgins who are guarded by men, or it may be not guarded, for that is not the point in question at present, and who are supposed to live in purity for the honor of the God they serve. But among Christians, those who maintain a perpetual virginity do so for no human honors, for no fee or reward, from no motive of vain glory, but, quote, as they choose to retain God in their knowledge, end quote. They are preserved by God in a spirit well-pleasing to him, and in the discharge of every duty, being filled with all righteousness and goodness. What I have now said, then, is offered not for the purpose of cavilling with any right opinions or sound doctrines held even by Greeks, but with the desire of showing that the same things, and indeed much better and diviner things than these, have been said by those divine men, the prophets of God and the apostles of Jesus. These truths are fully investigated by all who wish to attain a perfect knowledge of Christianity, and who know that, quote, the mouth of the righteous speaketh wisdom, and his tongue talketh of judgment. The law of his God is in his heart, end quote. But even in regard to those who, either from deficiency of knowledge or want of inclination, or from not having Jesus to lead them to a rational view of religion, have not gone into these deep questions, we find that they believe in the Most High God and in his only begotten Son, the Word and God, and that they often exhibit in their character a high degree of gravity, of purity, and integrity, while those who call themselves wise have despised these virtues, and have wallowed in the filth of sodomy, and lawless lust, quote, men with men, working that which is unseemly, end quote. Celsus has not explained how error accompanies the, quote, becoming, end quote, or product of generation, nor has he expressed himself with sufficient clearness to enable us to compare his ideas with ours and to pass judgment on them. But the prophets, who have given some wise suggestions on the subject of things produced by generation, tell us that a sacrifice for sin was offered even for newborn infants, as not being free from sin. They say, quote, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Also, they are estranged from the womb, end quote, which is followed by their singular expression, quote, they go astray as soon as they are born, speaking lies, end quote. Besides, our wise men have such a contempt for all sensible objects that sometimes they speak of all material things as vanity. Thus, quote, for the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him that subjected the same in hope, end quote. At other times as vanity of vanities, quote, vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity, end quote, who has given so severe an estimate of the life of the human soul here on earth as he who says, quote, verily, every man at his best estate is altogether vanity, end quote. He does not hesitate at all as to the difference between the present life of the soul and that which it is to lead hereafter. He does not say, quote, who knows if to die is not to live, and if to live is not death, end quote. But he boldly proclaims the truth, and says, quote, our soul is bowed down to the dust, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death, and similarly, who will deliver me from the body of this death? Also, who will change the body of our humiliation, end quote. It is a prophet also who says, quote, thou hast brought us down in a place of affliction, end quote, meaning by the, quote, place of affliction, end quote, this earthly region to which Adam, that is to say, man, came after he was driven out of paradise for sin. Observe also how well the different life of the soul here and hereafter has been recognized by him who says, quote, now we see in a glass obscurely, but then face to face, and whilst we are in our home in the body, we are away from our home in the Lord, end quote. Wherefore, quote, we are well content to go from our home in the body and come to our home with the Lord, end quote. End of section 5, read by David Ronald.